First day of a shoot at the house, we in fact did get some real snow the night before. And I remember being up there at 5 o'clock in the morning to make sure that nobody arrived and went tramping across this snow.
The house mother, they decided that the way her death was going to be was on a meat hook, which is not glamorous. But of course, you have to have a harness on to be hung up so that the weight is on your back. A guy came from New York, came for about 15 minutes, handed me a lot of straps and said, here's the harness, gotta go. And I'm looking at this. I have no idea what to do with this. So I asked the second AD if he would mind that I use him. So he took off his pants, which is not something I asked him to do, but often I will say, have Debbie take your clothes off, and everybody does. So he probably did too. And I strapped him up to see how it would work, and obviously it did.
The comfortable environment of the shoot was maintained by Clark, who gave small roles to many members of the film's crew.
Bob phoned me at lunchtime and said, I'd like you to come in after lunch. I need to have a chat with you. And then he threw this taxi driver thing. He had it in his mind all the time, but he wouldn't tell me until the day that I was going to do it. And he said, I'd love you to be the taxi driver. I said, sure.
Hey! Anybody there?
We filmed it quite late at night, actually. So I was there on the set much longer than I usually was.
If you take a look at the police officers in the park, one of them was a production manager. If you take a look at the guy that's on the Skidoo, that was Frenchie, and Frenchie was their prop master.
They said, we need more sorority girls for this scene. And so they said, Debbie, come on up. And I'm like, oh, okay. And the house mother was opening her Christmas present of this nightgown that I had made for her. And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. That's really nice.
I believe one of the producer's daughters is actually the girl that sits on Santa's lap in the Christmas scene.
Bitch.
He just has a knack for including all of these people into the film, and he cut costs that way.
Similar to many Canadian films of the time, an effort was made to disguise the Canadian locale in hopes of increasing the film's box office potential.
Using the American flag in Black Christmas is classic Canadian low self-esteem.
It was the done thing at the time to sort of make it seem like it was in America.
Anytime a Canadian producer was trying to make a film, they realized that their financial potential would be greater if it was able to travel well. They would camouflage the Canadian locale to kind of prove that, yeah, this is America, this isn't Canada.
They felt they'd be restricting the scope of the movie. They made it in Toronto.
It clearly takes place in Canada. I mean, there's a king can of 50 being drunk by Margot Kidder at one point.
There is a hockey game. There are snowmobilers.
Canadians are definitely going to recognize locations there. University of Toronto is largely featured.
Knowing that it's Canadian, you see those things, they kind of leap out at you. Those are kind of Canadian cinematic totems, as it were.
It made movies seem possible somehow because it was made in a place that I was at least somewhat familiar with.
Unlike the slasher films that would follow, such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Black Christmas contains few shots of blood and gore.
It isn't really that interested in the killing itself. It's kind of, it is sort of oddly sedate and almost kind of chaste about the actual violence.
People have pointed out I don't pay off. I don't cut to Andrea Martin going, she sees it, and we cut. You don't even see Olivia doing Kier. There's a complexity to the movie. It's not just a movie to scare people. The one with Margot is the only one that is actually a killing. I fought very hard to find a way to make that suggestively and poetically violent.
It's me, Billy. It's all right.
I think Bob was very strong in his ability to understand what was frightening to people. He took the kids, put them on the front steps singing a Christmas carol while somebody's being murdered upstairs. That juxtaposition was very important to it.
When the glass knife is coming down, these little items on the shelf are jumping, which was actually a technical error. The size of the loop in the camera was not quite correct. In this particular case, it enhanced what we were doing. I mean, it was one of those lucky accidents. Never intended that way, but it actually turned out to be, I think it actually added very much to the scene.
Even as a kid, one of the things that I loved about it was not only terrifying, but it was really funny, and it was really darkly humorous.
I think my favorite shot in the movie is one where they're having that Christmas party for the disadvantaged kids, where Margot Kidder's letting some kid drink her wine.
It's a bit late to head out now.
I think the little bugger schnockered, son of a bitch.
There's like a 15-minute long joke about fellatio in the film, which I think you wouldn't even see in a film today.
Could you give me the number at the sorority house? Please.
Yeah, sure. It's, fellatio 20880. Fellatio. It's a new exchange, FE.
It's a new one on me. How do you spell it?
Capital F, E, little L, L-A-T-I-O.
34 Cruiser and 408. Thanks.
Don't mention.
One of the most memorable aspects of Black Christmas is the chilling phone calls of the killer Billy. The lewd, nonsensical calls make a strange reference to his sister Agnes and feature expletives that would make even today's censors blush.
I was always stunned at the vulgarity of the movie. I hadn't realized how early that was and how little debate it caused. There was almost no furor at all over the use of many ugly words.
Using the C word, for instance, is always upsetting to see in a movie, and I think they're just kind of like it's sort of, you know, busting the taboo for the sake of it.
We've re-released the film on 2 DVDs. I've given copies to people for them to take a look at and to watch. The comment that's come back from a couple of women was, did you redo the soundtrack of those phone calls? And I said, what are you talking about? They said, well, there's no way in the 70s they said those things that were coming out that phone.
They're really effective, creepy phone calls. You're thinking, well, if the guy talks like this, then what's he going to do, you know, physically?
It's a confusion of voices. It's like there's sort of a multiple personality where there's a violence competing against itself.
I was a young actor here in Toronto, and I auditioned for Bob Clark. I sat in a chair in a couch and, you know, with my back to him so he could just listen to the sound of the voice and not look at me, and you know, and basically gave me the role right then and there.
A lot of the screaming and yelling is me.
Why are you doing this?
I did the voice actually standing on my head to compress the thorax, to give it that kind of slightly weird and spooky sound.
Agnes, it's me, Billy.
I was really struck with how there isn't a clear-cut explanation on the background or the reasons or the motives for the killer. And this is something that today's audiences would probably demand.
I have a very strong backstory about the killer and how he evolved, and there is a logic to the phone calls. It's very subtle. It's hard to follow. Billy is abusive and abused his little sister and was abused himself and probably killed his parents and probably locked her up in a basement for 5 or 6 years, and I think she escaped. And Billy doesn't like girls, and it turns out Agnes doesn't like boys.
Carl Zitterer provides an eerie minimalist score to Black Christmas. A prototype version to the music is seen in the earlier collaboration between Zitterer and Clark in Death Dream.
The score is rather understated in contrast to contemporary horror films.
He and Bob really made a choice that it wasn't going to be contemporary music or like a contemporary score. There is music, but more it's musical sounds.
It helps to have Christmas music because something that's so cheerful and inane and familiar that it can be warped in interesting ways.
With Carl and I, we thought alike, and we had all the same ideas. So there's a lot of music effects in clocks and the things that make up the real world. I go to great lengths to put them in.
Who is that?
I just go out and listen and see what's there, and it brings a great deal of reality to a movie.
There was a review in Cinema Canada that said that the film was misogynist. The reviewer may have a point, but in retrospect, it really is the least misogynist slasher film ever made. I mean, you know, your main character is not only pregnant, she's planning on having an abortion, which in an American slasher film would be a complete death wish. It would be the virgin who, of course, lasts to the end to, you know, battle the forces of evil with her purity.
I don't think that the women are presented as victims. I mean, they're pretty resourceful and they take action, and it's really the men around them, you know, the cops who are pretty much inept and the boyfriends who are not very sensitive. So I think it was a little bit ahead of its time. It's still a little bit ahead of its time that way.
I certainly intended to make these young ladies affirmative and intelligent with character. They're not giddy. There's not a giddy one amongst them. Olivia particularly, she's a hero. Some people criticize me, God, you know, these movies, they always run back in the house. She runs back into the house as a great act of courage. She gets the poker to save her friends. She makes a clear, heroic, and depth of character decision.
Until the very end, the audience is left in limbo. While the police assume they've solved the case, a chilling revelation is made.
The fact that there is an open ending, that the killer isn't quite caught, that it could easily go on, is rewarding.
The irony in the end of this, everybody patting themselves on the back of Black Christmas, that they've, you know, solved the case. All the brains get together and determine that it's all finished, and it isn't.
You crave some kind of justice, you crave some kind of explanation, and you don't get it.